The world you live in is not the world as it is. It is the world as it has been constructed for you. Every headline, every market swing, every truth you've been told about money and success has been filtered, edited, and carefully distributed so you never question who designed the game. And yet, behind the surface, there is a code. A code that has guided every dynasty, every empire, every titan of finance for centuries. Billionaires don't play by luck. They don't gamble their way into fortune. They obey a dark code of wealth, unspoken rules that separate those who control the system from those trapped inside it. Most people think wealth is about working harder, climbing higher, or getting lucky. That's the myth. The dark code begins with something far more primal: control of perception. Billionaires know that money is not first about numbers. It is about belief. A billion is just a figure on a screen, a ledger entry. But what makes it real is that millions of people agree that it is real. Control the belief system, and you control the money. That's why every empire is built not on gold, not on oil, but on narratives. Whoever writes the narrative owns the capital. The dark code whispers this truth. The majority will always chase after illusions. Promotions, salary increases, bonuses, crumbs designed to keep you running in circles. But the billionaire mindset never chases. It engineers. Instead of running after opportunity, they build the system others must run through. That's why the wealthy own exchanges, not trades. They own platforms, not posts. They own pipelines, not barrels. The first rule of the dark code is this: design the game, never just play it. Take hedge funds as an example. The public sees them as high-risk investment machines, but in reality, they are sophisticated weapons of influence. Hedge funds don't simply bet on the rise or fall of assets. They orchestrate movements. They manufacture liquidity crises. They position themselves where the crowd cannot. And when the crowd panics, they harvest. The dark code isn't T about predicting the future. It's S about shaping it just enough that your prediction becomes the truth. Another principle is silence. The wealthiest figures you know of are not the wealthiest people alive. The true titans are invisible. They understand that visibility is vulnerability. To obey the dark code, you must master the art of strategic invisibility. Never reveal the depth of your power. Use shadows, layers, proxies. The more attention a billionaire has, the less power they usually hold. Those who are loud, flamboyant, constantly in the spotlight, they are often pawns, not kings. The real kings operate behind the curtain. But invisibility is not about absence. It is about presence without exposure. Think of the Rothschilds during the Napoleonic Wars. They had information networks faster than governments. By simply controlling knowledge, they positioned themselves to profit whether Napoleon won or lost. That is dark code thinking. Never attach your fortune to an outcome. Attach it to the flow of outcomes. Hedge every side and profit regardless of direction. The dark code also reveals the truth about time. Ordinary people think in hours, days, maybe years. Billionaires think in decades, and dynasties think in centuries. The trick is to compress time for yourself while expanding it for others. You accelerate your own results through leverage, capital, data, AI, while ensuring the masses stay trapped in long cycles, 40-year mortgages, 30-year careers, lifelong debt. You escape the timeline they are chained to. That's why a billionaire can achieve in 5 years what others can't in 50. They have hacked time itself. Understand this: money is not scarce. Attention is scarce. Energy is scarce. Focus is scarce. The dark code trains you to reallocate scarcity, to see what others overlook, to convert invisible assets into visible wealth. For example, data. Most people freely give it away without thinking. But billionaires recognize data as the new oil. They build empires not by drilling fields, but by drilling minds, collecting behaviors, predicting choices before you even know you've made them. This is not an investment strategy, it's a surveillance strategy monetized. The code also requires that you master detachment. The rich are not sentimental about assets. They buy and sell companies like pawns on a chessboard. If a business loses its strategic value, they cut it loose without hesitation. Meanwhile, the middle class clings to emotional attachments. The family house, the retirement fund, the brand they believe in. But belief is a weakness in this game. The dark code commands, detach from the object, attach only to the leverage it provides. Let's go deeper. Billionaires understand that markets are not free. They are structured arenas, built like casinos. Every casino ensures the house always wins. The dark code dictates, if you are not the house, you are the gambler. And gamblers always lose. So billionaires build the house. They build the platforms others are forced to use. Amazon takes a slice of every seller's effort. Google takes a slice of every advertiser's budget. BlackRock takes a slice of every asset under management. That is the house advantage. That is dark code architecture. The public is taught to diversify as safety. But billionaires obey the opposite principle. Concentration, then domination. They don't diversify until after they've conquered one sector. Diversification is for protecting wealth, not creating it. Wealth creation requires going all in, but in a controlled, calculated strike where information and leverage give you near certainty of victory. Only after the fortress is built do they diversify into empires. And then there is influence. True wealth is not just measured in numbers, but in decision-making power. If your capital cannot bend policies, shift markets, or redirect industries, you are not yet inside the dark code. The richest quietly finance think tanks, universities, politicians, not for charity, but for narrative engineering. They write the textbooks your children study. They fund the media that shapes your perception, and they do it quietly, so you never realize the leash on your own thoughts. The dark code is not democratic. It does not care about fairness. It cares only about positioning, about building asymmetry, where $1 of yours is worth 10 of theirs, where one move of yours eliminates 100 moves of your opponents. It is warfare disguised as finance. Every merger is a siege, every acquisition a silent coup, every crisis an engineered harvest. This is the battlefield the public never sees, because the narratives are always painted differently. And here is the hardest truth. You cannot obey the dark code while thinking like the crowd. The very first step is to unlearn what you've been taught. Schools train you to be predictable. Jobs train you to be replaceable. Debt trains you to be dependent. The dark code begins when you step outside those systems and realize the game is not to be inside the machine, but to own the machine. Once you own the machine, you write the rules. Now, understand why this knowledge is so hidden. If everyone obeyed the dark code, the system would collapse. There must always be players, dreamers, believers, and gamblers feeding the house. That is why these principles are never taught openly. They are whispered in private rooms at private clubs between those already initiated. And yet, if you are listening now, you are being initiated into this truth. You are being given the keys to the hidden operating system of wealth. The dark code doesn't promise comfort. It promises clarity. And with clarity comes power. But power requires sacrifice. The sacrifice of illusions, of herd thinking, of the easy stories the system feeds you. If you can make that sacrifice, you enter a different reality. One where wealth is not a dream, but a weapon. Where time is not an enemy, but an ally. Where every move is engineered, every action compounded, every outcome bent in your favor. This is the beginning of the journey. The first layer peeled back. Ahead lies deeper territory. The unspoken rules of power, the hidden alliances, the mechanisms so complex and dangerous that most will never even glimpse them. But you are not most. You are entering the shadows where the real game is played. Most people believe wealth is about numbers, about net worth, about adding zeros to a bank account. But that's the surface level. Billionaires know that wealth is not measured in digits. It's measured in power, in access, in control over forces that the average person doesn't even know exist. To step into the billionaire class, you must understand that money is not the destination, it's the passport. The true destination is sovereignty. And to achieve sovereignty, you need to follow rules that the public will never read in any finance book because those rules are not written down anywhere. They're passed through private conversations, whispered in corridors, enforced in closed rooms where cameras aren't allowed. These are the unspoken rules, the dark code of wealth, and every billionaire you've ever heard of obeys them like law. The first rule is silence. A billionaire never reveals the real moves until years after they're made, and sometimes never at all. Silence is not just about secrecy. It's about timing. Timing is leverage. If you know something before the crowd, you win. If the crowd knows what you know, you lose. So billionaires build information moats. They construct private channels of data, intelligence, and research that are so far ahead of what the public consumes, it's like watching a live event versus reading about it in a history book. By the time the news covers it, the billionaire has already exited the trade, already flipped the asset, already extracted the profit. The silence protects them, while the noise consumes everyone else. But the second rule is far more subtle. Never play on the same board as the masses. If the masses are trading stocks, the billionaire is trading influence. If the masses are chasing real estate, the billionaire is buying city blocks. If the masses are obsessed with a product, the billionaire is buying the supply chain that manufactures it. You see, billionaires operate on higher layers of the financial pyramid. They don't compete where the competition is thick. They compete in spaces where almost nobody else even knows the game exists. This is why you'll never see them bragging about flipping properties or day trading. They're engineering the systems that the rest of the world depends on. That's the dark code. Always move 2 levels above the crowd. The third rule is weaponized patience. The average person wants returns in weeks, months, maybe a few years. A billionaire thinks in decades, sometimes in generations. They plant seeds that they know they'll never see bloom because they're not thinking about personal gratification. They're thinking about dynasty. That's why you see billionaires funding space exploration, private research labs, deep technology that won't mature for 20 years. The small thinker says, "Why would anyone invest in something so uncertain?" The billionaire says, "Because when the future arrives, I want to own it." That's not investing. It's time control. It's bending the arc of history in their direction, and that's why their wealth compounds at scales that feel superhuman. They understand that patience is not passive. Patience is active power. It's how you outlast every competitor who burns out chasing quick wins. But behind these visible rules are darker, more hidden ones. For example, the rule of selective exposure. A billionaire doesn't let their mind get contaminated with noise. They don't scroll endlessly. They don't consume random content. Every input is filtered, curated, weaponized for leverage. They know that attention is the most valuable currency of all, so they guard theirs like a fortress. They hire people to filter the world for them. They buy media outlets to shape the narrative. They influence algorithms to control what billions of people see on their feeds. To the billionaire, exposure is not about entertainment. It's about psychological control. And while the masses are addicted to dopamine hits, billionaires are addicted to asymmetric advantage. That's why their worldview is so different. They live in a different information universe, one that bends reality in their favor. Now let's talk about the rule of invisible leverage. Billionaires understand that money itself is weak compared to the leverage it can command. $1 million in the bank is nothing. But $1 million deployed into influence, into political donations, into AI systems that process financial flows faster than human traders, that's unstoppable. Invisible leverage means you multiply your force without anyone even knowing you're applying it. Hedge funds like Renaissance Technologies build algorithms that read market flows the way a grandmaster reads a chessboard. But that's only one dimension. Billionaires also apply leverage socially, politically, and culturally. They'll fund think tanks, they'll sponsor independent research, they'll bankroll narratives that reshape public perception, all while staying in the shadows. The average person sees chaos. The billionaire sees choreography. That's invisible leverage. Another rule is asymmetric risk. Ordinary people are taught to avoid risk. Billionaires are taught to re-engineer risk. They don't gamble. They design outcomes. If they enter a market, they've already stacked the deck. They've already positioned lawyers, regulators, lobbyists, analysts, and technology to minimize downside while amplifying upside. They're not taking risks the way you think. They're transferring the risk to someone else. When a billionaire invests in an energy company, for example, they're not exposed like you would be if you bought a few shares. They're hedged through multiple layers: commodities, political influence, private insurance structures, even public subsidies. What looks like boldness is actually a calculated trapdoor. They win regardless of the outcome. That's the billionaire code. Appear fearless, but never enter the game without rewiring the rules in your favor. Then there's the rule of invisibility. You might think billionaires crave the spotlight, but the smartest ones don't. They hide. The faces you see on magazine covers are often just decoys. The real operators are invisible, moving through shell companies, trusts, private family offices that never appear in headlines. They let others become the public face while they harvest the power from behind the curtain. Why? Because visibility attracts scrutiny, and scrutiny attracts attack. The dark code says, let others take the arrows while you collect the spoils. That's why some of the wealthiest individuals in history barely have a digital footprint. They mastered the art of camouflage while still shaping the systems everyone else depends on. And then there's a rule that almost no one speaks about: the ownership of time. Most people trade time for money. Employees, entrepreneurs, even many millionaires fall into this trap. Billionaires don't. They buy time in bulk. They buy other people's decades by hiring them. They buy lifetimes by automating processes. They buy futures by controlling industries. This is why they're so calm in the face of storms that terrify the masses. They're not in a rush. They already own the clock. They've compressed decades into years by stacking leverage, by outsourcing, by removing themselves from the grind entirely. If you wonder why billionaires appear so detached, it's because they're not trapped in the illusion of time scarcity. They designed systems that keep working long after they stop. There's also the rule of layered identity. A billionaire is never just one person. They're a network of entities. They exist as trusts, corporations, offshore accounts, holding companies. Each layer shields them, protects them, multiplies them. So while you see one individual, in reality, you're looking at an organism with dozens of arms and hundreds of eyes. This is why they're nearly untouchable. If you try to attack one entity, another shields them. If you try to regulate one stream of income, another floods in. To play at that level, you have to understand that identity itself is a weapon. A normal person says, I am me. A billionaire says, I am 100 versions of me, each with its own armor, each with its own battlefield. That's the hidden operating system of wealth, layered identity as invincibility. Now let's push even deeper into the dark code. The rule of narrative control. A billionaire knows that perception creates reality. So they don't just invest in assets, they invest in stories. They shape the story of an industry, the story of a technology, the story of a nation's future. Why? Because if you control the story, you control the capital flows. People don't invest in numbers, they invest in narratives. The masses pile money into whatever story they believe. The billionaire writes that story, funds the storytellers, amplifies the message, and then collects the money that follows. This is why you'll often see massive PR campaigns ahead of big billionaire plays. The public thinks it's organic. It's not. It's manufactured consent. The dark code says reality is negotiable when you own the narrative. But perhaps the most ruthless rule of all is detachment. A billionaire is emotionally detached from the moves they make. They don't fall in love with assets. with businesses, with trends. They see everything as a tool. If a tool stops working, it's discarded, no matter how beloved it may be to the public. This detachment allows them to pivot with incredible speed. While the masses are emotionally tied to their jobs, their houses, their investments, the billionaire cuts ties instantly if the data demands it. That's how they survive crashes, recessions, wars. Detachment is not coldness, it's survival. It's the ability to operate without being trapped by emotional gravity. So when you look at billionaires, understand this. Their power is not an accident. It's not luck. It's not even just intelligence. It's the result of obeying a dark code that most people will never even perceive: silence. Playing 2 levels above. Weaponized patience, selective exposure, invisible leverage, asymmetric risk, invisibility, ownership of time, layered identity, narrative control, detachment. These are not just rules. They're laws of a parallel reality, a different universe where wealth obeys physics that the average person has never even glimpsed. And here's the unsettling truth. This code isn't optional. If you want to rise into the highest levels of wealth, you either adopt these rules or you remain locked out forever. Because billionaires don't compete with the masses. They don't even see the masses as competitors. Their real battle is with each other, at levels of influence and control that stretch across nations and industries. And unless you start to think in their language, in their hidden operating systems, you'll always be playing a game that was rigged before you even sat down at the table. But if you study their moves closely, you'll notice something strange about billionaires. They don't play by the same economic physics that govern everyone else. While most people are trapped inside a straight line of effort, time, and money, billionaires bend the curve. They unlock hidden dimensions of wealth where time compresses, information is filtered, and leverage multiplies far beyond what seems mathematically possible. This is not luck. It's not chance. It is a private operating system, a dark code of wealth, built on principles so counterintuitive that the average person never even thinks to look for them. And in Stage 3, we go deeper into these hidden codes, the rules whispered in boardrooms and executed behind closed doors, the very laws of power that transform a human into a force of nature in finance. Let's begin with the rule of perception asymmetry. Billionaires understand that markets don't reward truth. They reward perception. The difference is everything. If you know the truth but the crowd doesn't believe it yet, you can position yourself to profit from the collision. That is why billionaires spend not just money, but entire war chests, shaping what the world sees and hears. Media isn't entertainment for them. It's a weapon. Narratives are engineered to move billions in capital flows, while the billionaire sits patiently on the other side of the bet. To control perception is to control value itself. But here's the next layer. Billionaires know that information itself decays. It has a half-life. By the time you see it on the news, it's already worthless. So they build information moats, networks of insiders, private data streams, AI systems crunching signals you don't even know exist. Imagine having satellites tracking the parking lots of retailers before earnings are reported. Imagine scraping private flight data of CEOs to predict mergers. Imagine AI parsing millions of documents per second for micro-patterns. This is the bloodstream of a billionaire's empire. Data that gives them sight into the future while the rest of the world argues about the past. Another code is the rule of selective invisibility. The rich don't just show wealth, they hide it. Not because they fear taxes alone, but because power works better in the shadows. Shell companies, offshore trusts, holding structures nested inside holding structures. Layers so complex that even forensic accountants struggle to follow the trail. Why? Because visibility invites attack. Invisibility multiplies optionality. If nobody knows where your assets are, nobody can freeze them, target them, or predict your moves. It's a form of financial stealth technology. But while invisibility protects, asymmetric exposure is how they grow. Billionaires don't chase small wins. They position themselves so that a single strike can generate life-altering upside, while downside is capped or neutralized. Think of how venture capital works. 9 failures mean nothing if one investment returns 100-fold. The same logic applies everywhere, in derivatives, in real estate, in political lobbying. They plant seeds not for guaranteed income, but for exponential harvests that can change the structure of their empire in one season. The average person diversifies to sleep at night. The billionaire concentrates to wake up sovereign. But here is the part nobody teaches. Billionaires build wealth in dimensions of time the average person doesn't operate in. They compress decades into years. Through control of capital and networks, they bend time so that what would take 20 years for someone else takes 2 for them. A single phone call can accelerate progress that would require you a lifetime. This is not metaphorical. When you command capital and information, you can bypass obstacles that stall everyone else. That's the dark code of time compression, not working harder, but changing the speed of reality itself. Then comes energy allocation. Billionaires don't waste energy debating trivia. They don't get dragged into arguments or distractions that don't scale. Every joule of mental energy is invested into moves that ripple through entire systems. They're not thinking, how do I save on groceries? They're thinking, how do I tilt the regulatory framework of an industry to funnel billions in my direction? Their problems, their stress, their obsession is scaled to empire-size questions. That is why their results dwarf everyone else's. Another hidden code is ownership over income. Billionaires don't want paychecks. They want assets that pay them forever. Businesses, royalties, patents, properties, algorithms, funds. Things that earn while they sleep, and more importantly, things that can't be fired or downsized. Ownership is the skeleton key, and everything else is a distraction. When you're chasing income, you're running on a treadmill. When you're stacking ownership, you're building pyramids that stand long after you're gone. Let us go even darker. Billionaires play the regulatory game in a way the masses never notice. Laws are not obstacles to them. Laws are raw material. They fund think tanks, policy groups, lobbying firms. They seed the ground years before a regulation is written, shaping it to lock in their advantage. By the time the law reaches the public, it's already been engineered in their favor. This is one of the most powerful billionaire hacks of all. They don't just play the game, they quietly write the rules. And then comes synthetic influence, the ability to engineer demand where none existed before. Think of luxury fashion houses that turn cloth into cultural currency. Think of energy drink companies that make sugar and caffeine into symbols of power. The billionaire trick isn't making products, it's making meanings. They inject story into matter, and the world pays 10 times the price because the symbol is stronger than the substance. The deeper you look, the clearer the pattern becomes. Billionaires don't just operate in business. They operate in psychology, narrative, and control of attention. They turn markets into mirrors of belief. They know that humans are programmable, and capital flows wherever belief flows. Master the story, and you master the flow. This leads us to perhaps the darkest code of all, controlled chaos. While the masses crave stability, billionaires profit from volatility. They don't want calm seas, they want storms, because storms move wealth from the weak to the strong. Crisis is not danger to them, it's raw opportunity. That's why some fortunes only appear during wars, collapses, pandemics, or crashes. The billionaire isn't praying for normal times. They're architecting strategies for chaos, waiting to strike when the world panics. And finally, there is succession immortality. Billionaires think not in years, but in dynasties. Their plays are not just for themselves, but for their bloodline, for foundations, for legacies that stretch across centuries, trusts, family offices, hidden holdings that ensure the game doesn't end with them. While most people think in terms of retirement, billionaires think in terms of dynasties and civilizations. This is not about a bank account. It's about rewriting history through wealth. So what does all of this mean for you, the listener? It means the rules you were taught are not the rules that govern reality at the top. If you want to play at that level, you must discard the small, linear, predictable thinking of the middle class and adopt the dark codes: perception asymmetry, information moats, selective invisibility, asymmetric exposure, time compression, scaled energy allocation, ownership, regulatory capture, synthetic influence, controlled chaos, and succession immortality. Each of these is a lens that rewires how you see money, power, and time. Once you internalize them, you stop living like a consumer inside someone else's empire and start constructing your own. They won't tell you this part, because if you knew it, you'd never think like the masses again. There's a code within the code, a second layer of billionaire thinking that doesn't appear on magazine covers or interviews. These are the rules whispered behind closed doors, in private dinners at Davos, in shadowed lounges of Mayfair and Manhattan, where access itself is currency. The first hidden code is the law of invisible ownership. True billionaires never own anything directly. They operate through trusts, offshore entities, shell companies, and holding structures so complex that even regulators struggle to untangle them. It's not about hiding. It's about control without exposure. If the public sees their name on a yacht or mansion, that's already a mistake. The game is to command assets without ever appearing to possess them. This protects them from lawsuits, from governments, from enemies. It also creates deniability. You can't attack what you can't prove exists. The second code is the power of reverse leverage. Most people think leverage means debt. For billionaires, leverage means flipping the tables, making others carry the weight. They'll fund ventures with other people's money, but structure it so they retain upside while outsiders absorb the risk. They'll manipulate timing, letting governments subsidize losses while they capture private profits. Think of how hedge funds orchestrate bailouts. When things collapse, it's the taxpayer who bleeds. When things rise, it's the billionaire who collects. That's reverse leverage. You offload the downside and monopolize the upside. The third code is silence as a weapon. Most people overshare. Billionaires undershare to the point of invisibility. Silence becomes a shield. They move in the shadows, letting others speculate while they act in stillness. In negotiations, silence makes the other side nervous. In public life, silence creates mystique. Elon Musk tweets chaos, but the real billionaires you've never heard of, they dominate because no one sees their moves until the war is already won. Then comes the network over the net worth. People confuse money with power, but power is not money. Power is access. Billionaires build concentric circles of influence, layers of advisors, fixers, politicians, artists, scientists, lawyers. They buy access to minds and voices that money alone can't reach. And once the network is in place, money becomes secondary. Because with the right call, with the right favor, you can move entire markets without lifting a finger. Another hidden rule, the ritual of information dieting. Billionaires are ruthless about what enters their mind. They don't scroll endlessly like civilians. They filter. They design strict inputs, curated intelligence briefings, specialized data feeds, summaries written by analysts. They starve themselves of noise so their brain stays sharp. Meanwhile, the masses drown in distraction. In the billionaire's world, attention is the rarest currency. Guarding it is the ultimate discipline. But let's go deeper. There's the law of controlled chaos. At first glance, billionaires look like they want order. In truth, they thrive in disorder. Crises are engineered opportunities. They buy when others panic, they expand when others contract. But here's the twist. Some of them manufacture the crisis itself. A whisper in the right place, a rumor dropped, a regulation pushed quietly through a lobbyist. Suddenly, the market shakes, and while the masses lose billions, the billionaire swoops in to acquire assets at fire sale prices. They don't just exploit chaos, they design it. Another secret, the code of compound reputation. Compounding doesn't just apply to money, It applies to trust and brand. Billionaires understand that once the world believes you are unstoppable, opportunities chase you. Deals close faster, investors beg to join, governments give favorable terms. Reputation compounds like capital. That's why they invest in perception, in PR warfare, in subtle myth-making. It's not about being the smartest in the room. It's about being perceived as the one who can't be ignored. Now let's go into the darker layer. The rule of hidden calendars. The rich don't live by the same time system as you. They know events, summits, cycles, and meetings that never appear on your calendar. Secret retreats in the Alps, off-record summits where deals are struck before markets move. By the time the news hits you, the billionaire has already positioned months earlier. They operate on pre-news, not news. If you're reacting to headlines, you're already playing their game and losing. The next secret is the obsession with asymmetry. Billionaires hate even trades. They want skewed bets where the downside is capped, but the upside is unlimited. They'll invest in a startup with $5 million for a chance at $5 billion. They'll structure contracts so they profit whether the deal succeeds or fails. They never enter a 50-50 game. Every move is engineered for asymmetry. Minimum risk, maximum optionality. Another, the discipline of sovereignty. For the ultra-rich, sovereignty is not about borders. It's about freedom from dependence. They diversify citizenships, passports, residencies. They ensure their children are educated across continents. They hold gold, Bitcoin, real estate, equities, private equity, art. So no single system can control them. Their allegiance is not to a flag. Their allegiance is to sovereignty itself. Let's sharpen it even more. The principle of unseen influence. Billionaires rarely shout orders. They whisper ideas into the right ears. Influence is subtle. It looks like a chance conversation, a friendly dinner, a donation to a cause. But that whisper shifts policy, that dinner rewrites regulation, that donation tilts markets. You'll never see their fingerprints, only the effects. That's the art of invisible power. Now, another hidden weapon. The psychology of scarcity. Billionaires engineer scarcity where abundance exists. Luxury goods, manufactured scarcity. Tech IPOs, scarcity of shares. Real estate, scarcity of land. By controlling supply, they bend demand to their will. Humans are hardwired to chase what's scarce. Billionaires exploit this code relentlessly, whether in markets or culture. Then comes the double ledger rule. Billionaires think in two ledgers, the financial ledger and the power ledger. Some deals lose money on purpose but win influence. Some ventures bleed cash but create dominance. Amazon lost billions for years, but Bezos was playing the power ledger, monopoly positioning. If you only see the money, you miss the real game. The second ledger is always about control. And here's the most forbidden one, the legacy time bomb. Billionaires plant seeds they may never see bloom. Dynastic wealth is built on moves designed for generations, foundations, trusts, long-term stakes in resources like water, energy, land. While the masses chase quick returns, the billionaire thinks in decades, even centuries. Legacy itself becomes leverage. This is the arsenal, the codes behind the codes, not motivational posters, not surface-level mantras, but the dark operating system that billionaires obey in silence. Each code a weapon, each rule a shield, and each one invisible until you learn to see with billionaire eyes. And now, as you absorb these unspoken laws, remember, they are not written in books. They are whispered in shadows. To know them is to step outside the script society wrote for you. To use them is to cross into the forbidden architecture of wealth. The world you see is a carefully constructed illusion. The charts, the headlines, the pundits on television, they are all actors on a stage designed for you to react, not to act. Billionaires know this. They have looked behind the curtain and understood the mechanisms that shape perception, manipulate systems, and bend markets to their will. Stage 4 is where you see the machinery itself, the hidden engine driving the wealth of empires, the invisible levers only the most elite can pull. The first revelation is the architecture of control. Most people think power is linear. Money buys influence, influence buys more money. The billionaire knows it is geometric. Influence flows through networks, through perception, through timing. A single move can ripple through multiple sectors, touching markets, governments, and cultures simultaneously. It's like playing 3D chess in a world where others are playing checkers. To master this stage, you must think in systems, not transactions. Every action must consider not just profit, but effect, reaction, and feedback loops. Next is the algorithmic dominion. Behind hedge funds and investment firms lies an army of machines analyzing human behavior at micro and macro scales. These are not ordinary AI systems. They digest trillions of data points, consumer behavior, shipping manifests, social sentiment, satellite imagery, even social media patterns to predict human movement before humans know it themselves. This is why some funds seem prophetic. They are not. They are engineered for predictive dominance. Understanding this is the difference between trading in the market and orchestrating the market. Then there is the capital war matrix. The billionaires you see are not competing with each other casually. Every major market move, every acquisition, every innovation is part of a broader conflict for capital supremacy. They deploy funds like battalions, targeting weak points, isolating threats, and neutralizing competition silently. Hedge funds manipulate liquidity to force collapses and profit from panic, not by accident, but by design. They don't just play the game, they engineer it. Your perception of a crash is a side effect. Their profit is the objective. Consider leverage beyond money. Most think leverage means borrowing capital. True leverage is multidimensional. It includes political access, media influence, technological monopoly, regulatory capture, and social credibility. A billionaire may invest $50 million but leverage it into $5 billion impact by orchestrating a narrative, lobbying politicians, and controlling scarcity. Leverage is a force multiplier, an invisible code that compounds in ways the average mind cannot calculate. The next code is temporal arbitrage. Time is currency, but the ultra-wealthy treat it as a weapon. They compress decades into years through foresight and pre-positioning. They act months before news, years before competitors, and centuries before legacy matters. Elon Musk doesn't just launch rockets. He designs infrastructure, patents, and cultural influence that will dominate for generations. Temporal arbitrage is about playing several lifetimes ahead of the crowd simultaneously. Then comes the knowledge moat. Billionaires never operate on public knowledge alone. They build intelligence networks, human and digital, that feed proprietary insights unavailable anywhere else. Analysts, insiders, informants, AI systems, satellite imagery, private data streams, all feeding a layered, encrypted map of the future. This moat protects them and positions them to exploit opportunities before anyone else can even see them. To enter this level, one must prioritize learning what is invisible, unknown, and unreported. Next, psychological dominance. It is not enough to control capital. The billionaire must control perception, emotion, and belief. They manipulate expectations subtly: scarcity, urgency, optimism, fear. The crowd moves according to emotional algorithms that billionaires engineer. Elon tweets, Bernard Arnault restricts supply, hedge funds seed rumors, all engineered to provoke predictable human behavior. Understanding psychology as a market tool is central to Stage 4 mastery. Another hidden secret is synthetic scarcity. The billionaire can create desire out of thin air, limited editions, timed releases, artificially constrained access, all designed to manipulate demand and perception. This isn't consumer manipulation, it's market engineering. Scarcity is a psychological lever, and billionaires know how to pull it at scale, bending human attention and capital simultaneously. Then there is networked sovereignty. True power is not just wealth, it is freedom from dependence. They maintain multi-jurisdictional citizenships, offshore holdings, private infrastructures, and diversified asset classes that make them immune to single-system collapse. Their empires are distributed globally, ensuring control even when one system fails. Sovereignty is both shield and sword, enabling bold moves that the masses cannot dream of. Algorithmic ethics manipulation is another layer. Billionaires understand the rules of human compliance and legal gray zones. They structure investments, contracts, and corporate entities to exploit regulatory gaps without technically breaking laws. This is why some of their strategies appear untouchable. Compliance is not a restriction. It is a canvas on which to design advantage. Then comes information cascades as weapons. They seed information intentionally, a rumor, a leak, a subtle narrative, triggering cascades in markets and media. Traders, journalists, and even regulators unknowingly propagate these waves, amplifying the billionaire's influence. What looks random is engineered. What looks like consensus is orchestrated. They play reality like a composer, and the crowd dances to their melody. Next is the quantum mindset. Billionaires think in probabilities, not certainties. Each decision is evaluated across multiple possible futures. They hedge for events that haven't occurred yet and prepare exit strategies before entering deals. This is why they appear infallible. Their minds operate in a superposition of outcomes. They are present in every scenario simultaneously, yet act decisively when reality collapses to one path. Cultural engineering is another hidden lever. Billionaires shape culture to align with their interests. Luxury brands, entertainment, social media, philanthropy, all channels to shift perception, desires, and consumer behavior at scale. Influence is invisible architecture. Markets follow culture, and culture follows billionaire orchestration. Finally, there is legacy architecture. Wealth is ephemeral if it cannot transcend generations. Billionaires create systems that endure: foundations, dynasties, trusts, intellectual property, political influence. Their moves today are designed to ripple decades into the future, ensuring their name, power, and capital remain untouchable. Stage 4 mastery is not about living rich. It is about becoming an enduring force. As you absorb these principles, understand this. Stage 4 is not about imitation. It's about perception. It's about seeing the hidden rules and recognizing the architecture of reality itself. Every secret we've revealed is a layer of the invisible system that billionaires operate in. Every hack, every code, every strategy is a node in the network of power that the average person will never touch. To step forward, you must internalize these codes, adopt the mindset of preemptive influence, and begin thinking in layers: control, leverage, time, psychology, and legacy. Only then can you operate in the dimensions where billionaires play, where ordinary rules do not apply and outcomes are sculpted, not left to chance. This is the apex, the moment where the viewer no longer sees the world as a series of transactions, but as a living system of flows, levers, and probabilities. Where every decision, every move, every relationship can be optimized for exponential impact. Stage 4 is the final key, the blueprint to step into a reality beyond normal comprehension, where financial power becomes the language of influence, freedom, and creation itself. They don't measure risk the way you've been taught. Risk to them is never volatility. It's never a short-term dip on a chart. Volatility is opportunity. Chaos is liquidity. Panic is profit. The billionaire understands risk as one thing only: the possibility of being forced to play someone else's game. That's why they build buffers so deep, so invisible, that no market event can drag them out of position. They use complex derivatives, offshore shells, dark pools of capital, All of it designed not just to amplify gains, but to guarantee sovereignty. Because sovereignty is wealth's final definition, the ability to never be forced to move when the crowd screams, "Move." And inside that sovereignty lies a darker rule. The billionaire doesn't just protect against loss. They engineer environments where others bleed. For every market crash, there is a billionaire who architected the cascade. You think crises are accidents, but many are manufactured storms, carefully timed to coincide with options expiry, with leverage unwinding, with liquidity vanishing in the shadows. They don't play defense. They weaponize the very system you thought was neutral. At this altitude, information is the true currency, but not the information you see scrolling on Bloomberg, CNBC, or even leaked reports. Billionaires create what are essentially shadow central banks of knowledge. They buy access to satellite feeds that track oil tankers leaving ports. They purchase real-time surveillance of crop yields across continents. They pay for backdoor access to credit card transaction flows before those numbers ever hit quarterly earnings reports. They don't wait for the market to reveal reality. They know reality days, weeks, even months before the market does. And in finance, time is money, but knowledge is time. You want to know why they can compress 50 years of wealth building into 5? Because every second you're reacting to news, they're acting on pre-news. Every time you digest headlines, they've already digested the pipeline of events that will create those headlines. That is their hidden time machine. It's not mystical, it's intelligent superiority. Now let's push deeper, because the secrets aren't just about markets. They extend to power structures, to how billionaires reshape the very playing field you think is fixed. Lobbying is too basic a word. Billionaires don't lobby, they redesign. They don't approach governments begging for favorable policy. They plant their operatives inside ministries, regulatory bodies, think tanks, and academic institutions. They don't fight rules, they author the rulebook. By the time a policy hits public debate, its outcome is already locked, written, and signed off by the capital that orchestrated it months before. This is what the unspoken billionaire code really means. Control is more profitable than competition. While you're told capitalism is a game of free markets, they've already realized free markets are too unpredictable. So they build mechanisms to limit uncertainty. That's why their world feels like a casino where the house always wins. Because they are the house. Consider derivatives. You've been told they're tools of speculation. That's a lie. To the billionaire, derivatives are tools of domination. Options, swaps, credit default instruments. They're not simply financial products. They're mechanisms to hedge, to suffocate competitors, to dictate liquidity flows. If a hedge fund like Medallion wants a stock to bleed, they don't deshort the stock. They suffocate the company's credit lifeline through swaps and structured exposure. The stock price then collapses as a downstream effect. Billionaire warfare is invisible because it operates on layers the public doesn't even know exist. And beyond finance lies another domain: data. We're living in a war you cannot see. It's not fought with bombs, but with servers, algorithms, and predictive models. Billionaires run private AI systems far more advanced than the models you can access. They're not asking ChatGPT what to invest in. They're building proprietary intelligence engines that consume petabytes of alternative data, weather patterns, shipping routes, micro-sentiment across millions of social accounts. These models don't just predict market moves. They predict human behavior, political shifts, even cultural moods. To them, markets are just a reflection of mass psychology, and whoever controls the inputs controls the outputs. That's why secrecy is the ultimate shield. You will never see their real playbook. Even when leaks happen, even when whistleblowers talk, you only get fragments, controlled releases that distract from the real machinery underneath. Their game is asymmetric. You can study for decades and still not realize that the field you are re-studying has been quietly tilted. But let me reveal something even darker. The billionaires don't to just trade assets. They trade time horizons. Most people operate on days, months, maybe years. Billionaires operate on decades and beyond. They plant moves today designed to only bloom 20 years later. They use endowments, trusts, dynastic vehicles not to keep wealth, but to lock in influence, because influence compounds faster than capital. By the time you notice their wealth, you're seeing just the surface. Beneath it lies a structure of power that guarantees their children and their children's children will inherit not just money, but systemic leverage. And here's the paradox. They live in public invisibility. They build brands around certain names, Buffett, Musk, Dalio, but most of the real architects remain invisible. The ones who never appear on Forbes lists, who never give interviews, who operate entirely through shadows. They don't want fame, because fame is surveillance. They want silence, because silence is armor. The unspoken code is brutal. Those who talk, lose. Those who reveal too much invite predators, regulators, competitors. That's why the billionaires who last the longest are ghosts. Their fingerprints are on everything, but their names are on nothing. And when you peel back another layer, you discover the game isn't just finance, it's architecture. Architecture of belief. Because money, at its root, is collective faith. Currency only works because people believe it works. Markets only rise because people believe they rise. Billionaires manipulate this belief matrix. They seed narratives. They hire think tanks. They fund independent research. They flood social media with curated fear or optimism. By the time you feel bullish or bearish, the emotional seed was planted weeks ago by a billionaire agenda. This is the unseen machinery of persuasion, and it's why they win. Because they don't just move markets, they move minds. And the final secret of stage 4? They don't seek more money. That's the illusion. Billionaires seek control of time, space, and narrative. Money is only the byproduct. Once you understand that, you begin to see the hidden operating system beneath the visible system. And you realize the billionaire isn't playing chess against you. They're playing chess against history itself. The dark code of wealth doesn't just whisper in boardrooms or flicker across trading screens. It runs deeper, into the neural wiring of the billionaires who live it. Stage 4 is not about incremental advantage. It is about the moment where advantage crystallizes into inevitability. It is the stage where the player becomes the game itself, where the billionaire is no longer reacting to forces, but bending those forces like light through a prism. The first unspoken law here is what could be called the architecture of inevitability. Billionaires don't bet on events, they design inevitabilities. A retail trader looks at a stock chart and asks, what might happen? A billionaire looks at the same market and asks, what must happen no matter what? They search for systems with structural pressure points, tax rules, demographic shifts, credit cycles, and then they lock themselves into positions that profit not from timing but from certainty. Think of it this way. A billionaire doesn't surf the wave, he builds the wave machine. But inevitability alone is not enough. Enter the second code, controlled optionality. The wealthy don't limit themselves to one outcome. They create lattices of choices, each engineered to pay off. Imagine holding dozens of keys, each leading to a different treasure room. Whether markets rise, crash, or stagnate, one of those doors opens. Nassim Taleb calls it anti-fragility, but the billionaire class hardwires it into everything they touch. They don't just hedge risk, they sculpt it. They turn chaos into an ally. When 99% lose in uncertainty, the 1% accelerate. And this leads to the third code, shadow timing. Forget the cliche of timing the market. Billionaires don't time. They set clocks. Through lobbying, regulation shaping, and quiet influence over institutions, they synchronize environments so that their bets mature exactly when needed. It's like planting a mine under the financial system and holding the detonator, knowing the explosion will arrive not by luck, but by design. When regulations shift, when interest rates rise, when currencies devalue, it looks like chance. But to them, it's choreography. The fourth layer is even darker: value distortion. The masses believe price equals value. Billionaires know price is a story. Control the story, and you distort the perception of value itself. Media narratives, analyst reports, strategic leaks, sudden scandals. All of these are levers. Think of how an asset can be vilified until retail dumps it in panic, only for insiders to scoop it at pennies, then later rebrand it as the next savior of the market. Wealth at this level is not just about anticipating reality. It is about scripting perception, then monetizing the gap between perception and truth. Fifth, silent scale. True wealth does not shout. A retail investor brags about a 100% gain. A billionaire quietly accumulates positions that appear invisible, hidden in complex derivatives, offshore layers, or opaque private deals. By the time the world notices, the trap is already sprung. Silent scale is why you rarely see billionaires buying at the peak of hype. They are already holding the foundation decades earlier, while the crowd fights over the scraps. Now, consider the sixth, the liquidity paradox. Billionaires never want to be trapped in illiquidity like retail traders are. But paradoxically, they also profit from creating illiquidity for others. By cornering supply, locking up float, or engineering demand surges, they manufacture scarcity. Then they become the only exit door. Imagine a fire in a crowded theater, but only one billionaire holding the key to the door. Everyone must pay him to escape. That is the liquidity paradox in action. Seventh, the long con of credibility. Billionaires build reputations not for status but as weapons. A reputation for brilliance, philanthropy, or genius gives them air cover. People trust their moves. Analysts parrot their narratives. Governments welcome their advice. The greatest trick is not deception. It is making the truth irrelevant because the source seems unimpeachable. This is why billionaires obsess over image management. Credibility compounds faster than capital. Eighth, cross-market domination. The ordinary mind sees stocks, real estate, crypto, commodities as separate arenas. The billionaire sees them as chess pieces on the same board. They arbitrage sentiment across domains. A scare in equities drives flows into bonds. A crypto collapse opens doors for hard asset grabs. A housing downturn sparks distressed buyouts. Each market becomes a vein feeding into one circulatory system, their fortune. They do not think in categories, they think in networks. Ninth, information time zones. It's not just about having more data, it's about having it earlier. Information leaks, pre-release reports, whispers from insiders. Billionaires live perpetually one time zone ahead. If you know a policy 24 hours before the public, that's not 24 hours. That's a decade of advantage compressed into one decision. Time itself becomes asymmetric. The billionaire is not in the same clock as you. Finally, the 10th, and perhaps the darkest code, exit orchestration. Anyone can buy. Few know how to exit. Billionaires design exits that profit them twice, once from the rise and again from the fall. They sell into euphoria while seeding optimism through media. Then, as collapse begins, they provide lifelines through distressed funding, buyouts, or bailouts, paid for by governments or the masses. They never really leave the table. They simply change seats, always cashing both sides of the cycle. Stage 4, at this point, is less about money and more about asymmetry of control. When you internalize these codes, you begin to see why wealth feels unreachable to most. The billionaires are not just playing with more chips. They are playing a different game, with rules they themselves wrote, referees they sponsor, and clocks they control. And so, as stage 4 closes, the listener must confront a truth. The dark code of wealth is not just about making money. It is about bending probability until it breaks in your favor. It is about never entering battles you cannot win. It is about creating systems where loss itself becomes a disguised form of gain. This is why billionaires live in inevitability while others drown in chance. They understand the hidden operating system of reality, and once you glimpse it, you can never see the world the same way again.